Thank you so much, Joe. I mean, next time I want more passion.
A little too academic, too mellow. I thought Carmel would mellow me out.
You met my expectations. I have my own set of questions, but I'm going to first encourage our students who may wish to speak, and then other, staff, faculty, and other guests here. Who would like to start us off here? Come on. Please. And Nate, do you want to introduce yourself and then ask a question?
Hi, my name is Nathaniel Taylor. I'm a research associate here at CMS. Recently graduated this semester. Do you see any opportunity in the prophesized 2018 Democratic wave in both Congress but also in local government? Is there any way to convince the DNC that this should be a priority talking point and hopefully that will allow this issue to sort of ride that associate it with Trump to Trump and be on blah blah blah.
If there was a way to eliminate the DNC, I would.
Well, yeah.
What are they doing?
Email John, yes.
John is not involved.
But I mean,
but yes, looking at all the trends, and this is part of. Yeah, I guess I should be another one. It's not just anger from those left behind. Now you have, and I guess it's part of the mass movement. I should tease this out. There's anger about what's going on. People are in motion over this, and part of this mass movement has gone from the Women's March on January 21st, 2017, which I think was a seminal moment. And it has gone from that into sustained political action. And it is just going. And there's money, and there's candidates. You saw what happened in the Virginia elections. They were going to be happy. The Democrats had hoped to get 4 seats. They got 15. And most of those were won by women. And most of those women had never run before. Whoa. That's in Virginia, a formerly red, now purple state. Okay. Can that happen in 2018? The trends are indicating. If it does, okay, that's nice. The Democrats take control. What do? What's their policy on this stuff? They don't have one. They don't have one. Why? Because they're still tied to the Obama policy. They're still funding. Their view of the Obama policy is fund nuclear weapons. That's what Congress is doing. So what changes that? You can see signs. Adam Smith, the head of the Democratic ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, who would become chair if the House flipped, he's not in favor of this, and for very good, solid national security reasons. It would drain money from conventional weapons that we actually use to put into nuclear weapons that most of us hope we never see. So he's on board with this. You just had a letter from 16 senators, including 4 possible presidential contenders, criticizing the nuclear posture review, raising their alarms about it. There's sentiment there. There's direction there. There's movement there, but they don't have a policy. They don't have a plan. So in some ways, we don't have the luxury of waiting to devise a plan. Let's have a Keith Payne-style study group and get all the people together and plan for 2021. No, it might happen in 2018. So there's a sense of urgency about getting all this together. I'll give my shorter answers.
I see you, John.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for coming. From the East Coast, my name is Ben McIntosh. I'm a student here. There are a lot of people who go to school here who will go into the government in various capacities. And what would be your recommendation for us as young thinkers and bureaucrats and diplomats and politicians and everything someday in the future to actively participate and be a good leading edge on these issues in our small capacities?
Pay attention, take notes. I worked in the government. My first job was in the Reagan administration. And I was on an intergovernment. I was in charge of helping an interagency task force on what to do about these mass demonstrations in Europe. This was 1984. That's what I was doing. So these are the biggest demonstrations you see in Europe. These are up until the Women's March, the biggest demonstration in the United States was the 1 million people in Central Park in 1984 protesting nuclear weapons. That's what I was doing. And I met this. I was doing Central America work because it turns out the Central America policies and the criticism of that was tied up with the anti-nuclear. And one of the young military officers I was working with was this guy, Ali something. north. And I learned a lot about government, about how they thought. I then went in the House Armed Services Committee and the Government Operations Committee, and that's where I really learned about nuclear weapons. So I loved getting my master's degree, but it's in government that you really understand how these things work, how a bill becomes a law, how a development program becomes a bomb. So go in, pay attention, find good mentors and help them. Because as a young staff member, you're not going, unless the chances of you having a fundamental policy influence are very small. So it's realizing that you got a good 5-6 years of work to do in order to get to a spot where you can really be influential, unless you strike gold. I mean, George Stephanopoulos did. That's a real good example. George is very young and he just rose like that. Or currently you might see, somebody like Stephen Miller just rising like that. But those are rare.
So I know Jean could talk about the South African nuclear program, but I don't think that's what he wants to ask.
No, not at all. Thank you, Joe. You never cease to amaze and entertain.
You gotta keep people's attention.
You got mine.
Jean, introduce yourself.
I'm Jean Dupré. I'm a former staff member here and a former senior official at the CTBT. I don't want to talk about, ask anything about CTBT, but I'm struck by your crisis moment list and going, obviously, carefully read your article about nuclear threats. To me, it basically can summarize it. That is the acceptance of nuclear weapons and the legality of the use and threatened use of nuclear weapons. I think you can capture all of those in that one. And I would argue that under that crisis movement is the acceptance of nuclear weapons and the legality of the threat and the threatened use of them should be in that list. Because
I'm adding it.
carrying a big stick has now become the norm. And so Trump can be whoever he is, and I hope everyone doesn't dislike him as much as I do, but Trump represents something. He represents, at least, depending how you argue it, the majority of people in this country feel. He was elected. But he's not the only one. There's the Putins, there are a number of others. So I think your other point about the rise of new national program is probably one of the most important ones. It reminds me of what happened prior to the First World War. And I would argue another part of that is the limitation of the international rule of law to counter that. Because we all know what happened there, and we all know what happened during the Second World War too. Is the United Nations and are these treaties and arms control as we know it capable of controlling? And I would argue no. I think
So how would you phrase that? It's a crisis for
I think that
arms control, international legal
the
restraints.
limitation of arms control and international rule of law. Well, we have a new treaty on nuclear disarmament, and a lot of my friends were involved in that, and kudos to them. What does it mean? It means nothing. Nobel Peace Prize. Oh, President Obama also got the Nobel Peace Prize. What does that mean? So I think we have to take a serious introspective look at what it is that we are trying to do. Are we trying to protect something that was valid during 20, 30 years ago? Or do we need to look at a new world order? So in terms of your opportunity, two questions. One, you mentioned the German statement, which I'm pleased about. And again, are they going to be willing to face President Trump heads on and say, we're not going to do this, this or that, unless you take this away? I don't think so. I'd like your view on that. How can international leaders be more proactive, vis-a-vis not just President Trump, but President Putin and others too? And two, how do you see the future of arms control as we know it today? Is there a future?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for the last one, so I'm just going to, this is the moment we're in. The phrase tipping point has been overused so much, but it certainly is true for arms control. And the people who have opposed arms control for decades are in control of the policy apparatus right now. So in a way that I have to say, this wasn't even true for the George W. Bush administration. I know that John Bolton was our ambassador to the United Nations. I get that. I think it might be even worse now because there's a general rejection of the international system that seems to be more profound and more, I don't know, more blood. It's more, it's deeper than it was even from the neoconservatives who rejected parts of the international system. Something. Okay, so I don't know. I think you're absolutely right about this. Is recognizing there's a crisis in the ability of international legal instruments to regulate national behavior. I got to think about that because it might be. I'm just looking from my, my frog at the bottom of the well. This is just my nuclear view, but it might be broader. It might be happening in humanitarian issues as well. Those are great additions. Great additions. Thank you.
I'm exercising remarkable restraint. I'm not going to interject myself in the discussion.
Well, we are having dinner tonight.
Right here,
so
yes.
I'm
going to call on Jessica and Melissa, and then we'll see where we go from there. Jessica.
I'm Jessica Barnum. I'm a senior manager here at CNS. But I wanted to ask you, when you think about the current crisis moment, there's another thing that really leapt to mind that I think you might sympathize with, which is obviously disinformation far precedes all the conversation about fake news. But to me, the crisis of expertise that we're seeing now in terms of facts and expertise being taken seriously by people in leadership positions in the US government, which is supposed to be democratically governed, is unprecedented in the sense that you can actually have constant rhetoric from the President of the United States and everyone else in government that flat out factually contradicts the terms of, for example, the Iran agreement. And they will say something that is completely opposed to what is on paper, and all the experts scream and scream, but it says this, that's completely a lie, and they just keep saying it. And so the idea that you can have no attention whatsoever paid to facts and expertise by those in power, and not just, the usual kind of disinformation is really striking.
That's an excellent point. You got to include that. I may be under accounting for the Trumpian moment of this. It's not just a normal policy moment. This is again unprecedented. We have a wholesale assault on the free press, and we have a wholesale assault on truth. I did a little tweet today about how we've been talking about Trump's assault on the pillars of a free society for some time now. Well, we saw it in the hearing today when DOD feels free to go up and present a chart that shows 4 other states modernizing and us with nothing. Nothing? What have we been spending $55 billion a year on? And there's nothing there. Now, fortunately, Hans Christensen of the Federation of American Scientists issued a corrected chart using their symbols and put that in. But it shows that the DOD officials feel free to do this. Feel free to do this. It is a profound problem.
Okay, just a comment. One thing I think you mentioned as well is it's not only self-inflicted, it's also Putin, it's also people coming in and destabilizing the system and affecting truth in the way of the government from outside. I think that only be a small addition.
And you would say Putin overall in the system, or his particular attack on America?
Here's the picture of it right now, but you're having instability interjected from the outside, casting down on things, undercutting the basic sort of pillars of democracy and trust. It's both self-inflicted and being done to us.
Good.
Melissa.
Hi, Melissa Hannum at CNS.
Hey, Melissa.
Hi. Using your top-down view, where do you see the most interesting change happening in our field? And do you think any of these innovations are going to actually lead to disarmament in our lifetime?
Yeah. One, we have to recognize the odds are stacked against us. I just mentioned it's about $55 billion a year, give or take a few billion, that we spend on nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons programs. That buys a lot of lobbyists, that buys a lot of studies, that buys a lot of analysts. I mean, the DOD is just funding program after program. They have their own think tanks pumping out the pro-nuclear line. All foundations together spend about $55 million on non-proliferation and arms control and nuclear elimination. So we're outspent by 1,000 to 1. Can you overcome those odds? Well, we did during the Iran deal. It wasn't quite 1,000 to 1, but we think the opponents of the Iran deal spent 10 times what we spent and our partners on that. So can you do it? Yes, if you're smart and focused and you pick your points and you leverage. So you can do it. It's tough though. What do we see now? So number one, you got to maintain the infrastructure. So Monterey, the Arms Control Association, the Union of Concerned Scientists, the Federation of American Scientists, you got to keep that expertise in place. You can't let that stuff wither. It's vital. Hans Christensen is a national treasure. Just to individualize it, just to personalize it, you need that kind of work. I mean, quite frankly, I see the work that you're doing here at Monterey as sort of a new element. The stuff that you and Jeffrey and your team and others have been doing here. I shouldn't pick individuals out, but you and Jeffrey. And that you're making breakthrough work and you're getting national attention for it. Talk about picking your spots and leveraging small amount of funding, lots of hours of work, big national impact, even international. So you got to identify those and help them grow. Okay. But overall, I would say we're betting on the mass movement. We think there's something happening here. And we think that more and more it's not about Washington. We're working with people who are introducing resolutions into state legislatures. California, just last week, there's a group of people that introduced basically a resolution in support of the Markey-Liu bill to challenge, to correct the problem we have when one person has the ability to launch a nuclear weapon first. Markey-Liu basically wants to correct that problem. And so can you get state municipalities to do it? You're starting to see this movement, which by the way is exactly what happened in the freeze movement. You couldn't move Washington, you moved states. And what that meant was you let the representatives from those states, from those regions, know that this was politically popular, that there was space for them to support it in Washington, but you had to go outside Washington to do it. We're starting to bet on that. So we're starting to fund things like Beyond the Bomb, a project of Global Zero, Win Without War, one of the groups, a lot of the mass organizations, and there's many more of them than I knew about. Ultraviolet, anybody heard of them? There's a lot of groups out there, and they're organized and they're syncing up. There's things like that. The women's movement. How does our issue work with the women's movement? How does the women's movement work with our issue? Where's the intersectionality there? Again, something powerful happening. Can we do it? Can we merge it? So that means investment. That means for us, as a foundation, making grants in that direction. And finally, humanitarian consequences. I mean, the ban treaty, I understand there's a legitimate debate about that. But the humanitarian consequences movement that gave birth to it, and the ban treaty is now sort of the embodiment of that, extremely powerful. Extremely powerful, and you have world religious leaders on your side. I don't know if you've been reading what Pope Francis has been saying, but that Vatican summit that he had November 10th, it's incredible stuff. I haven't seen, certainly a Pope, or even a world religious leader, speak as clearly, as forcefully, as passionately as he is on this. We have got to tap into that. We have got to adjust our thinking, adjust our analysis to understand what's going on there. I got to add that. Thank you.
Sarah, actually, we're really pleased to hear what you just mentioned, because Sarah is spearheading a new project that we have at the center, which will focus on women and nuclear disarmament, non-proliferation. But Sarah, you want to introduce yourself and then ask your question?
Hi, Joe. Thank you for coming. My name is Sarah Goodgood. I'm a research associate here, but I am also an alum of the Institute. And if Bill isn't going to say it, I will. I think U.S.-Russia relations are something that should be articulated explicitly on your list here for the current crisis moment, because yes,
go deeper.
So,
U.S.-Russia relations, not too vague. Go.
Right, it is too vague. We've been spending a lot of time looking at U.S.-Soviet examples of non-proliferation, cooperation, and I see that you've touched here upon sort of the post-arms control world and what that might look like. I think because of allegations of Russian collusion in the elections and the environment in Washington is very, very allergic to interacting with Russia on any difficult issues, we are at a moment where even if there is interest in resuming cooperation on non-proliferation issues, the optics of it are so bad. that
Right.
it's
You
going to be
mean,
incredibly
ironically, the pro-Russian candidate cannot actually
Exactly.
cooperate with Russia on some of these issues, say
Exactly.
arms control.
difficult. On arms
So
control,
even,
but
what would you think?
non-proliferation
New
as well.
Start?
I think
Are we
New
going to
Start, I
renew?
think it will be very difficult to negotiate a follow-on to New Start. I think it will be difficult to extend New Start, particularly with Shannon stepping down and strategic stability talks. I don't know what will happen with that. So I think that's something that it touches upon a lot of the bullet points that you've outlined here, but I think it's something that deserves an explicit mention.
And let me elaborate. It was
Yeah,
actually
please.
one of the items that I was going to press you on. And let's go back to your.
Yeah, and this is a
your
draft.
list.
I mean,
Yeah, no,
this is-
but I want to go back to your list of the 5
Oh,
threats here, because while you tangentially touch upon the U.S.-Russian relationship, I think it has to be explicit. I'm not sure exactly where I would place it, but I would certainly put it in the top 2 or 3, and that is the potential for actual military conflict involving the United States and the Russian Federation due to a total lack of trust, not a diminished trust, a total lack of trust, and the potential for accidents, miscalculations, and the like. I don't think we have ever had as an acute situation as we do at the moment. And I think it's exacerbated by the leadership in Washington. But in many respects, it was almost as bad, if not in some respects worse, in terms of Russian perceptions before the new administration. That is, this lack of trust.
yes.
And so I think that has to be captured both in terms of the threats and also this current crisis moment. So I would just reinforce.
So, right, so saying there's an arms race doesn't actually capture that, because it doesn't have that element of the...
No, I mean, there are arms
the
races in lots of
nuclear
places,
superpower conflict.
but it is the element
Yes.
of no trust. I mean, I think
Yes.
Sam Nunn and Ernie Moniz the other day pointed out that, and I've been referring to this for a long time in my own lectures here. I mean, if we were to have a repeat of the 1995 episode where there was a sounding rocket launched off the coast of Norway, in 1995, President Yeltsin could say, Bill Clinton would never do this. This is, it's impossible. It must be a mistake. Today, I suspect Russian nuclear weapons would have been fired. And that was, and this was an instance in which the government of Norway notified the Russian Federation, but it didn't get passed to the right channels. So I think that is a tremendous danger, and I think it's not being addressed adequately. So,
19, great, thank you very
Sure.
much.
please. I may not be recognizing in the order that you raised your hands, but please, if you would.
Hi, Connor Michelotti, MPTF student, first semester. I think with the fact that a new administration will eventually come, I think it's going to be important to take into consideration the steps that that administration would need to take to regain its status as the leader of the Western world, but also to regain its footing as the leader in non-proliferation efforts that could be respected by its surrounding Western countries. What do you think a new administration's step-by-step process might look like to essentially undo the damage that has been done in the Trump administration?
Well, history chastens us on this. Many Americans welcomed Jimmy Carter because he wasn't Richard Nixon, and he wasn't Gerald Ford, and they soured on him right quick. Whether that was fair or not fair, and he didn't leave much of a lasting policy impact. You could say the same thing about Barack Obama from another political point of view, how quickly part of America turned on him. So, we don't have the policy for the new administration. We don't have a playbook to offer them. And I've been in enough of these things to know that the candidate doesn't have this. They have instincts, they have impulses, they have directions, they have philosophy, but they don't know what to do. So you really need a team. And I was on the Obama team in 2007 that crafted the nuclear policy. I thought that was the best, most ambitious, most realistic nuclear policy any candidate had ever carried into the White House, and it still wasn't enough.
There's no perfect format.
But we don't even have that now. So we do not have that. What would you advise Senator Chris Murphy or Senator Elizabeth Warren? What would you tell her to be saying on these things? Are they there? Do they know that they're in favor of the Iran deal? Yes. Do they know they don't want to spend that much money on nuclear weapons? But what exactly did you? And how do you prevent what just happened to Secretary Mattis? How do you prevent being captured by the building? My friends always say, either you run the machine or the machine runs you. And you see it all the time. General Guard knows this. You go in there with the best intentions, and the machine just grabs you, man. And it is really, really hard to go up against that. So at the least, we got to arm the next wave with sound policy, sound analysis, and a plan. One of the big criticisms of Barack Obama was he didn't have a plan for how to implement his nuclear policy vision. He had policy prescriptions, he knew what he wanted to do, but he didn't have a plan for implementing it the way you would have a plan for developing your budget. So we got to learn from that and do it again. Do it again better.
My name is Edrito. I'm doing a PhD, but I'm visiting students over here now. I'm working on nuclear design issues with the European Union. So my question, I have two questions. The first question is about the question of the way the Americans and the American president sees now the nuclear order. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there was a study by Dr. Sagan and Dr. Benjamin Valentino that actually said that how the Americans see the nuclear taboo is changing. So there are Americans that are willing to use nuclear weapons in some cases, and this is a kind of a shift compared to this so-called nuclear taboo. So do you think this also has influence on how this president sees also the way the role of nuclear weapons should be used or not? My second question is about the way the European Union was successful on making some lobbying over the Congress, which is about the Iran deal, which is actually I think never happened before regarding these issues. They were actually successful in making sure that the Congress would not blow up the Iran deal.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, they didn't reach to the president. So what? Because usually it's for Europeans it's always more. It has been historically more easy to talk with the president about this issue and not with the Congress. So what do you think are the consequences? What do you think that the European partners could do about it?
Yeah. Okay. Let me just take a stab at the second question. I think we had a tremendous victory at the beginning of January when the president did not blow up the deal. And at the end of December, it sure looked like that's what he was going to do. And he didn't do it, and it didn't happen by accident. It wasn't because there was a Washington Post editorial to keep the deal, or a New York Times editorial. People did a lot of work on that, a lot of organizing on that, spent a lot of money to, for example, bring European leaders over here to talk directly with Congress. So the European factor is extremely important in this debate. When I asked a Democratic staffer what was the most important thing we could do, she said, bring more Europeans. And their view and hearing what they said, and of course, Germany's a conservative government. The United Kingdom is a conservative government, and they're talking to conservatives in Congress, telling them to keep the deal, and that if we walk away from the deal, we walk away alone. Extremely important several years ago to get the deal, still extremely important. Mass movement's important here, in phone calls and letters and town hall meetings. I mean, that stuff matters, and it's like block and tackle, right? This is what you do if you want to get a policy change. It's not just having a really good report, a really good analysis, and it's bringing out, senior validators from the military, from the diplomatic world, to give the politicians the space they need. So, I think we have a real good idea of how to do that. And it really helps when the national security team of the President of the United States says, keep the deal. But it's not enough. Tillerson doesn't want this deal to go. Mattis doesn't want this deal to go. McMaster doesn't want this deal to go. And the President may still blow it up. Why? Because he's obsessed with Obama. Because he thinks he's Rome and Obama was Carthage, and he's going to scrape the earth clean. He's going after every single one of his initiatives. Healthcare, major domestic initiative. DACA, his major immigration initiative. The Iran deal, his major foreign policy initiative. Everything. His major internet initiative. I mean, it's just one after the other. So there's something profoundly disturbing about the policy analysis of the President of the United States and what he's focused on. And I don't know any way to counter that except to block him, except to try to block him. And what happens, and so if he does the worst on May 12th, what happens? So worst case scenario, where the whole deal falls apart, Iran decides it wants to restart its nuclear program, and it starts rebuilding, and without the ability to put in international sanctions anymore, and without any legal restraints on the program, really military is your only option if you want to stop it, so that increases the threat to war. Option B is the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese cooperate and keep the deal alive. And there's a way to try to convince Iran that it benefits more from accepting the restraints than it does from leaving. And in that case, then you've really seen, this gets to this point of the widening gap. I mean, President Trump has really driven a wedge between the basic European view of its security interests and the U.S. view in a big, big way. And that presents all kinds of problems beyond the Iran deal. In fact, that factor, what the Iran deal represents for the U.S.-European alliance, may be the most important thing, and may be more important than what the Iran deal does to restrain Iran's program. And I forget what the first question was.
What about the way the Americans now see the use of
the use? Yeah, this was brought up right away. Yeah, I think that's right. There are poll results. In fact, we just did a little tiny poll. And it turns out there's a whole bunch of Americans who are ready to use a nuclear weapon if necessary. So we gotta figure out ways to remind them what that would mean, and that's humanitarian consequences. Stop thinking about this as just another weapon. This is what the NPR wants to do. Small weapon. Won't be that much. We can use it, But it's what George Shultz said. A nuclear weapon is a nuclear weapon. If you use a small one, you then start using a bigger one. And Colin Powell, once you cross that threshold, there's no going back. So we've got to find a way to bring that message out there to more and more people.
Masako?
Hi, thank you, Joe. It's really fascinating. And my name is Masako. I'm an education project manager promoting disarmament education to young generations. And I would like to hear a little bit more about your opinion on the ban treaty. As someone originally from Japan, I'm really supporting this ban treaty, but at the same time, looking at this polarized debate over the ban treaty, especially when you look at the Japanese government, perhaps the Japanese government is one of the few countries completely supported in NPR, maybe with the exception of CTBT. And while the Japanese government is trying to be a bridge builder, but it's really completely supporting Trump's NPR. And at the same time, a global citizen, when Beatrice Finn visited Nagasaki, Hiroshima, and Tokyo, the civil society was really welcomed, but the Prime Minister didn't see it. Of course, there are some reasons why he couldn't see it, but I'm wondering if you could share your wisdom to bring these completely opposing views, at least, create some platform to discuss. And I know the Japanese government created some group of eminent persons meeting, but I really don't know. I'm quite skeptical about the effects of that initiative. So I would like to hear a little bit more about your opinion.
I started off against the ban treaty for many of the reasons you might imagine, that it was a diversion, that it was unrealistic, that the nuclear weapon states were never going to join this, and that you couldn't get enough states to break with the nuclear weapon states to make this realistic. And then as they started to move towards the drafting, I thought there was problems with the drafting that many of my colleagues pointed out. But I now fully embrace the ban treaty, and I celebrate its passage this last summer, and I look forward to helping those who want to bring it into force succeed in getting the 50 states they need. And one of the reasons is the complete collapse of the negotiations over the reduction and elimination of nuclear weapons. There is no alternative process going on. Nothing is happening. The last time the U.S. and Russia negotiated over nuclear weapons was 2010. So it stopped in the Obama administration, and these guys just want to put a stake through its heart in the Trump administration. I don't see any other progress possible on these issues. So I've come around on this issue philosophically. I think it is the right thing to do, that you should ban these weapons, that it's not a threat to the NPT, and I'm sure we can have long discussions about this. I know, and I don't know what Bill thinks about this, but people who spent their life building up the NPT have serious concerns that this could weaken the NPT, forum shopping, etc. I don't see it that way. I don't think it hurts. I think you've got to find something to build up the disarmament process to hold the barrier, or I think the NPT is going to collapse. I really do. I think if it wasn't for the ban treaty, we might be talking here right now about the unraveling of the NPT. We might be talking about it next year. Anyways, we get into the review process. But one of the things I wanted to do while I'm here in Monterey is learn more about this, because I'm relatively uninformed about the NPT forums. So I want to hear. In Japan, I am not a fan of Mr. Abe. I think he's a problem. I think he's a problem in enabling Trump. I think he's out of step with his neighbors. I think Russia, China, and South Korea have the right approach towards how to handle this North Korea problem. And Abe he's part of the militarist paradigm, which is a very strange thing to say about the leader of Japan. But this guy seems to be continually in favor of striking North Korea and not talking with them. I don't pretend to understand his game. I'd appreciate any insights you have, but he's not. I don't think he's helping.
Joe, I had an opportunity when we were in Paris in the fall to make a case which obviously didn't resonate fully with you. And that is, I share many of the criticisms that people around the room and elsewhere have expressed with respect to the NPT. I think it is at risk, but I think it is probably imprudent to forecast its demise, because as Jean knows as well as anyone, whether we were talking about 1995, 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015, these challenges, these risks have been perceived in the past as exceptionally acute. The divides between the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states were apparent from the beginning. I think I mentioned this, but we have a Canadian diplomat in our crowd here, a Canadian gadfly by the name of William Epstein, wrote about this when he discussed the first NPT review conference in 1975. You read it today, you think he's talking about very much the same situation. So I think we need to be careful not to exaggerate how the current situation is very different with respect to the NPT, although I would argue that it is different. And, but I'm not sure that it's on its last legs for a variety of reasons we can talk about elsewhere. But I want to share with you a different kind of a concern. I mean, I've long argued that if you're talking about proliferation challenges, that a very significant one that doesn't receive enough attention is ignorance and complacency. And I usually make that argument with respect to the need for education and young folks and the like. But I'm increasingly concerned that notwithstanding all of the things that you said, and almost all of which I agree with, that there is a tremendous complacency on the part of policy practitioners. Not just young people, not elected officials, but people who are dealing with disarmament and non-proliferation issues in most countries in the world. And the reason what really brought this home, a year ago, actually less than a year ago, we had a diplomatic retreat in Krems, Austria. I don't know if anybody in the room was with me at that. And the focus of the retreat was on a world in disarray. I also have been very impressed by Richard Haas's book and the issues that he raised. And I kind of started off sharing with him, with the group, not with Richard, but with the group, very high-level group of officials, heads of international organizations and the like, all the reasons why I thought the world was coming apart.
Mm-hmm.
And what shocked me was the reaction, almost without exception. And I think the one person who agreed with me was Dmitry Trenin, who was a Russian thing. Almost everybody, even someone like Des Brown, who was one of our keynote speakers, they might have had concerns, said, well, we've seen bad times in the past, we'll muddle through, it's really not as bad as you think. And it was so pronounced that at the first session the following day after I made my remarks over dinner, a good friend, someone who is certainly as much an advocate for disarmament as anybody you'll ever find, said, well, Bill's just too obsessed with this matter. Let's go around the room and we'll all think of something, a book that Bill should read to make him feel, provide something more uplifting. These are ambassadors, heads of international organizations, and I had to pinch myself. If at that moment in time, June of 2017, there was this attitude, well, it's bad, we're facing lots of difficulties, but it's not really a tipping point, it's not fundamentally different. And I was really distressed, and I remain concerned about this, because I think that there is reason to be exceptionally concerned. I would say that it's not a question of awaiting a crisis. I think we are in a crisis, and yet it's not recognized as such by many leaders and practitioners around the world. I don't know how we cope with that, but I just want to share with you another element of concern here.
Right. So balance the equation a little more. There are,
But I would say, there's a question of the durability of the NPT, and then many people think that the NPT is a surreal-like process, the review process. The treaty is important, but I think we have to separate that from other issues.
And you pointed out repeatedly that the NPT serves the members' interests. It's not yes, it's about a bargain, but it's also a collection of regional security guarantees that continues to serve Africa's needs and South America's needs, independent of the disarmament.
I think that's
basically
good. Anybody else here? Please, George.
I'm George Moore. I'm one of the scientists in residence. I'd go back to something that Bill said about adding to your original list the crisis points. I think probably the highest conflict potential is with China in the South China Sea. And they've transitioned from a coastal navy to a seagoing navy. They're doing more and more of that. And this is a long-term problem. It's not something that's going to go away. It's not something that's going to be modified in the short term.
And would you say that in general also the rise of China?
The rise of China is one thing. But China being aggressive outside of their coastal region, we need their cooperation with respect to North Korea. But they're in conflict. I was very struck when I spent a month at the University of Nanjing with the anti-Japanese feeling in Nanjing, and this is modern times. This is not. There are a lot of conflict points that we don't quite understand, and they're very dangerous.
Right. I've been to that museum in Nanjing. You go to that museum and you go,
Yeah.
70 years later, there's still,
Well, and the Japanese devil signs, around town.
yeah.
Okay, Amy,
Hey,
you
Hi there. Amy Sands, and I guess staff emerita these days from the Institute after many positions. I just want to sort of, since it feels like we're sort of ending this, go back to your top threat.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah.
think that is what's at the core of the direction we're going in. And the only way that will change is not only to do many of the things you're talking about, but to actually change who's the president, who's behind him, and mainly the Republican Party. And as somebody who went to both women's marches, at least in San Francisco, and found it incredibly inspirational, amazing. And if you have any opportunity to march in anything, you should, because it's sort of lost to our generation, I think. We sort of missed some of those wonderful opportunities. At least I was 12 years old in the 60s, so I didn't get to get out there. But as somebody else who also jumped into some of the groups in civil society, who are these indivisible groups that are all over the country, and there are, as you point out, just so many opportunities to get your voice heard in a sort of local way, but this postcard writing, the phone calling, it does make a difference. And if nothing else, you are doing it with people who have similar concerns, whether it's about the environment or nuclear weapons or the local water management, whatever you choose. But if nothing else, the silver lining to the elections of last year is that it did actually get people on a broad spectrum to wake up and say, if we don't make noises about these things, it's our own fault for where we're heading then. And so I only would encourage everyone to take very seriously that top threat you mentioned and say, what can I do to change that dynamic?
And are we about to end?
only if you wish.
Let me just ask you, so what do you think about that? Is the United States the number one nuclear threat in the world today? Is that the way
Yes, I completely agree with, I thought your threats, I agree with the additional sort of edits people made in some ways. But I think if we don't change the direction the U.S. is talking about and leading the world in, this whole concept that America first is really nationalism, and it's now reflected in so many other countries. We weren't the first country to have that kind of message, but we are such a leader globally.
Yes.
And at the same time to be pulling back from so many international partnerships and activities in ways that aren't productive. They haven't been replaced with anything that continues to sort of address these core concerns. What's amazing to me is that it's very hard to have that kind of international global discussion in the United States now, though, because you have to focus on domestic issues and what people really are worried about. If you looked at all the speeches from the State of the Union and the responses, no mention of environment. There was a rebuttal, I guess, that did have the mention of it, but it was like it wasn't an entity, and it wasn't, and it's the greatest threat probably to all of our continued existence. And it amazes me that you can't bring it up because it's this global issue. It's not America first. So I think we have to change the dynamic of how we all think and the mindset, and we can only do that by getting our own voices out there. And I do think there's some people who are doing some wonderful things to make that happen, whether it's a local election or whether it's just a bunch of postcards that lo and behold have some impact. It's surprising. So that's my little passion pitch.
Do this. You notice, by the way, that nuclear terrorism is not on my top 5 list.
I did notice that.
Well, that's intentional. My analysis is that the risk of nuclear terrorism has substantially declined with a number of things that we did. It's not by accident, it's by policy choices, including combat operations in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan that have basically disassembled ISIS and reduced what I thought was the greatest nuclear terrorist threat, but including things like the killing of Osama bin Laden and the fracturing of Al-Qaeda. Still serious regional problem with the ability to lash out, but a nuclear terrorism threat, that has been for decades our number one national security threat. I would not rate it that way now. And it's also because of the things we did in the nuclear security summits and the concentrated work of people to sort of drain the fissile material swamp. make it harder for people to get their hands on. That stuff matters, and we have to recognize this, which is why I take such issue in the NPR when it says that since the 2010 NPR, the nuclear security situation has deteriorated dramatically. No, it hasn't. It's changed. There's a whole lot of things that made us safer in those last 7 years, including the New START treaty, including the nuclear security summits, including the Iran deal. Off on that. Indivisible, real quick. This is such a feel-good story. This was just a bunch of young staffers 12 months ago, 13, 14 months ago, and they wrote a document that was just telling people how to organize, and it got 3 million downloads within weeks. And people started calling them up and saying, well, now what do we do? And they said, well, we told you, it's in the document. You go organize a group. Well, we organized a group. In fact, we have 100 people at my house. What do you mean 100 people? And suddenly, these things just grew up. It shows you what power there is if you've got the right strategy, which is why I'm going through this exercise to begin with. Trying to understand what's happening so that we position ourselves right, so we're focused on the right things, so we hit those leverage points. Indivisible now has chapters, at least 2 chapters, in every single congressional district. Do they do it for national security issues? They were not. But we gave them a grant to hire a national security staffer who's now integrating with the kind of work that's going on with more of the advocacy groups, a little less with the expert groups. They just put up a new web resource today for their Indivisible members on nuclear issues. So this thing, it's there. And you can feel it, and there's an excitement about it. And it's I hate to say this, but it's like your generation, not usual. and they are in motion in ways that I haven't seen a generation move for 30 years. I mean, it's really exciting to see what's happening in the tools and the way people are communicating, and the passion that they bring to the issues. That's what gives me great hope. I mean, we shouldn't hesitate to talk about how bleak it is, and it's a particular problem because so much of this is about one person. So much about it is presidential, and we are nonpartisan. We all are nonpartisan. We do not take sides in these issues. We support positions, not politicians. And yet, one of the biggest policy problems is this personality. It is a tremendously difficult challenge for us, how we handle ourselves in this way so that we don't slip into one camp or the other. So we keep trying to reach out to people who may pull a different lever when they go into the voting booth than we do.
Thank you, Joe. If I can just insert myself for a second, friends, then we'll call upon you. I mean, I would simply register a note of caution in terms of celebrating prematurely the demise of nuclear terrorism.
And just lowering it.
Yeah.
It's like threat number 6 or 7 for me.
But the reason is not
gone.
It's not with respect to necessarily the lower probability, high consequence nuclear terrorism.
Right.
But you have a number of, I think, higher probability, maybe lower dangers, but particularly the breakthroughs in the cyber area, vulnerabilities. I think it changes the equation. We just we don't want to take it off the off the table.
Right. I have not adequately factored in the increase in cyber threat into this list.
Friends, please.
So I'm Fan Stanek, I'm a scientist in residence here. So kind of a two-finger on what Amy was saying. One of the trends that really, really concern me is that people have a kind of lack of interest in science. I know this has been, but they just don't believe in science. This has been, trend that I know people know that, but so for example, Alan Roebuck's amazing work on doing simulations. How many people actually believe it in humanitarian consequence in the work that he's done? Right. So there's, I think, and then look at all the positions that are not filled. So this is to me, I think, a very, very dangerous trend in general. And it affects all of us. I think it ties a lot of this together.
And it's a problem in the foundation world. I mean, what we struggle more than anything. I mean, is really getting support for our scientists. And it's hard enough in the nuclear sector, Ray Zielinski's left us, but you try to find support today for work in the bio area, the CW realm. It's almost impossible. So I think the science issue is another important one to note.
Oh, wait.
Thank you.
We got Neil deGrasse Tyson. I mean, he's got a podcast, he's got a book, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. No, I hear you. I hear you. By the way, Alan Roebuck has got a very substantial grant, a 3-year grant to develop his work and to do a very large project on the impact of a small nuclear war. So there's hope there. And if you haven't been in touch with him, maybe you should. Get back in touch with him. He's sitting pretty comfortably right now.
Okay. Oh, you want? Okay, we'll take another question. Go ahead.
Given the...
You want to identify yourself, please?
I'm Dr. Raymond Mutcher, retired public health official. Given your great plan in 2007 for President Obama, how did we end up with the 1.4 trillion proliferation thing? What happened?
I have a whole slide about that, but I don't have to. But I'll tell you just very, very briefly. From resistance from the bureaucracy that he did not have a plan on how to overcome. Big problem internally on this, including appointing people that didn't believe in his vision. This is a real lesson you got to learn. You want to make change, you got to hire changers. Resistance from the Russians. The Russians stopped cooperating. I mean, it's really hard to negotiate another reduction treaty when the other side doesn't want to negotiate. It's really, really hard. And I would think, I'd be interested in sort of an after-action report. Were there ways we could have overcome that? Were there things we could have done that could have brought the Russians back to the table? I don't know the answer to that. The failure of our partners to jump in the boat with us, France and Great Britain, just didn't come. But then one of the most powerful factors was none of those. It was the political opposition. The Republicans politicized New START in a way that we hadn't seen in a very, very long time. And they were not going to give this president a foreign policy victory in an election year. And that is the major reason why they dragged out the ratification of New START in 2010 from what it should have been, which is April, May, June, to December, and only then in a last-ditch effort. It was only approved the last day of the Senate. And one of the reasons they did that was to not give him a victory in the election, which, by the way, the Senate, number of seats then just changed hand, made it much more difficult. And for one of the senators, Senator Kyle, he wanted to block consideration of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. And guess what? That worked. He strung it out, played rope-a-dope long enough, so that by 2010, the administration is exhausted. None of the people in the administration thought this was going to take so long, was going to occupy so much of the president's attention, and after 2010, the president had to go on to other things. You might remember, he had a health care issue, he had an immigration issue. Oh, by the way, the economy was still in the toilet, and he was trying to drag us out of it. By the way, he was unable to fully extract us, the U.S. from Iraq and Afghanistan. So we had other things to do, and the arms control agenda was just, it had to be. I don't blame him for this. It had to be kind of put aside. So we never got the CTBT. We never got what Medvedev and Obama had agreed to, another reduction treaty that would make the deep reductions they both said they wanted back in 2009. And that kind of political resistance, man, when you have a party on the other side that is determined, whose number one priority is your failure. That's what the leader of the Senate said. That's what the minority leader of the Senate said. What's his name? Senator? Again? McConnell. He said, my number one priority is to make sure Barack Obama is not elected president in 4 years. And that's what they did. And that's what they worked on. They didn't give him any cooperation on any major issue, including this. And so the basis that you need to have bipartisan support for these agendas to move forward was impossible to achieve. You couldn't get the significant bipartisan cooperation that you need to have arms control and non-proliferation really work. That's my short analysis.
Joe, we always enjoy watching you on television. We enjoy listening to you on the radio. Many of us, follow your tweets, but nothing is really a substitute for having you here in person. So I hope that you don't wait too long to come back.
I won't.
We do not only have the weather, but we have the next generation here, and we're really grateful for your having joined us. So please
Thank you.
join me.
Thank you very much.